Remakes are made of these. Who am I to disagree? Travel the theater, got seat number 3. I just wanted something spooky. Some remakes want to screw you. Some remakes waste $1 too. Some remakes don't respect you. And I'm sick of getting abused. I'm literally speechless. Just how can you screw something as simple as House on Haunted Hill up? The remake of House on Haunted Hill came out in 1999. It was distributed by Warner Brothers and directed by William Malone. That's okay, nobody knows who he is either. The movie also starred Geoffrey Rush and Famke Jensen, Jean Grey from X-Men. Out of all the movies that you could remake, House on Haunted Hill is honestly one that I just don't really understand. Don't get me wrong, I consider it a classic and honestly a really great addition to the haunted house genre, but who was clamoring for a House on Haunted Hill remake? I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people who do want remakes of certain movies, but I never really pictured House on Haunted Hill as one of those movies. It did incredibly poor at the box office, and on top of that, well, nobody liked it. So, I guess it's time to look at the remake of The House on Haunted Hill. Cutting right down to the chase, the movie begins with an insane asylum. Already, this is actually one of the really big differences, because in the original movie, the house wasn't an insane asylum or a hospital or anything like that. It was just a normal house that lots of different people wound up living in it and then apparently just went mad and killed people. Think of it almost like the hotel in The Shining, where people stayed in that hotel and then, a lot of bad things happened. It's very similar to that degree. But for some odd reason, they decided to change it to an insane asylum, which honestly is probably the most cliche thing you could do for, well, any kind of a haunted house, haunted hospital, anything. Just make it an insane asylum. And of course, the doctors are the stereotypical, just bad, mad scientist people because, well, they're doing this horrific stuff to the inmates. Yeah, where did you get your doctorate exactly? The inmates wind up rioting and kill everybody in the hospital, and the whole place winds up shutting down. Cut to present day theme parks! We are then introduced to the two main characters of the movie, who, in the original, were played by Vincent Price and Carol Amart, are now Geoffrey Rush and Jean Grey, that's what I'm going to call her, whose names are now Stephen and Evelyn Price.
What is it, Mr. Price? Business or pleasure?
I mean, cute that it's an homage to, the great Vincent Price, but yeah, it's kind of dumb. And credit where credit is due, but they did find a really good physical look-alike with Geoffrey Rush. I mean, he does look a lot like Vincent Price, at least to a degree. Acting-wise, though, that's a completely different story.
Sure is a funky old house, ain't it?
I don't know how you managed to hack into my computer, but
Bravo.
let's go back down and greet your guests. Show them the real you. Corny as Kansas on the 4th of July.
I'm Stephen goddamn Price!
Not me, Tulip. The house. I think it's marked you to be the first to die this evening.
I'm going to go ahead and start things off with the acting. Now, the acting in this movie is just completely terrible. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say that the acting in the original House on Haunted Hill was absolutely fantastic by any means necessary, but there was at least an air of quality to all the actors in it, especially Vincent Price and Carol O'Mart. They did a fantastic job playing the feuding couple who are definitely scheming and conniving against each other because they want to kill each other. And in the original, although they were incredibly mean-spirited people who are always jabbing each other, you kind of liked them because, well, they were classy. They had an air of just like, wow, you guys are terrible, but hey, at least you're kind of funny. In this movie, these two people are basically just assholes. All you need to do is just take one good look and see that there is a complete difference between Geoffrey Rush and Vincent Price.
I had a reason for inviting each guest. I wanted kind of a cross-section, from psychiatrist to typist, and from drunk to jet pilot. They share one thing: they all need money.
Shredded. Sorry. Decided to whip up one of my own. The group's so hungry for money they'd be willing to do anything. I thought you'd be more comfortable with your peers. Not quite. See those people down there? They're not the ones I invited.
Yeah, then who are they?
You tell me.
I mean, Geoffrey Rush is honestly a pretty good actor, so I don't really understand why he's putting in a crappy performance in this movie. I mean, who can forget his honestly magnificent performance in Gods of Egypt? I'm so sorry, I can't say that seriously.
From here on, it gets really scary.
The scariest thing about this movie is the critic rating. Stephen Price is a theme park owner, where the theme park is more so centered around spooky elements and stuff like that, and sometimes really intense thrill rides. Evelyn then requests Stephen to book the House on Haunted Hill for her party, which is very similar to the original one. Here's where things start drifting away a little bit. Stephen has a list from his wife of all the people that she wants to come to the party, but then he shreds the list, makes up his own list, and then... Do you remember in my original review where I said you didn't necessarily know if the house was haunted or not? Well, there was some evidence to prove that it could be haunted, especially with all the craziness that was happening in there, but you never truly knew if it was, the house was actually haunted, or if it was the mad mastery or puppetry from Vincent Price's character in the movie. In this one, well, the house is haunted. It literally shows the computer turning back on after Stephen turns it off, where then it erases his list and writes its own list. Well, there goes that suspense. And as it is with all 90s and early 2000s horror movies, we get an edgy rock song. In this case, it is Sweet Dreams by Marilyn Manson. I'm not going to play it because I don't want to get copyright flagged. However, another nice little homage to the original movie is they do have all the guests coming in hearses, just like in the original. Which, if that's something I gotta say about this movie, I do like a lot of the homages and head nods to the original movie. There's a lot of references, at least in the beginning part of the movie, to the original. Now, none of the characters in this movie, except for one, are identical to any of the characters from the original movie, except for technically Evelyn and Stephen. The one actual returning character is Watson Pritchard, who, if you can recall from the original movie, greeted us with his floating head. And this one, well, he's really not memorable in any way whatsoever. And basically, here are the rest of the similarities. He says, hey, welcome to my wife's party. If you guys stay here, I'll give you a lot of money. The house gets locked down. And yeah, that's basically it. Now, obviously, one of the big differences is Stephen, did make his own list, but then the house intercepted and made its own guest list. Whereas in the original, Vincent Price, he orchestrated the whole thing. So now he and his wife have no idea who any of these people are, except for Watson Pritchard. Now, what originally could have been something that was actually a little bit clever, where both Stephen and Evelyn had no idea who these people were, is thrown out the window because we already know the house is bloody haunted! And then this is basically the last comparison that we have between the original and the new movie. Watson Pritchard then brings everyone on a tour of the whole house, basically shows everybody, this is where this person died, this is what this invention was used for with the inmates, and blah blah blah. So that was actually a little bit similar. Obviously, the difference is, this was an insane asylum and not, just a normal house.
This is the saturation chamber.
What's the saturation check?
Hispanic is treatment for schizophrenia. What would drive a sane man mad would drive a madman sane. Something like that, I don't know, whatever. Lecture of shock therapy. Several of these rooms are together. Dr. Bannock would like to zap his patients in multiples of 18.
I would also argue that the whole aspect that this house is now an insane asylum, one, who puts a house on an insane asylum, two, basically all the creep and scare factor is gone because, well, it's kind of your cliche, stereotypical, like, madhouse stuff. When it came to the original House on Haunted Hill, that was just a normal house. In this movie, it's obviously an insane asylum, so it's like, yeah, you're going to expect it to be, well, creepy. Honestly, before we get to any more of the action, it's honestly kind of boring. There's a lot of going back and forth, kind of trying to figure out what exactly is going on in the house, the mystery behind the house and whatnot. It is a little bit interesting, and they do try doing that a little bit, just like in the original. But the thing is that we already know about the house. We saw it at the very beginning. It was an insane asylum. The doctor was crazy. And the inmates eventually turned against, well, the doctors. So it's like we already know the story. So there's not really much in figuring out any mysteries behind this house. Unlike in the original, where, well, we didn't know anything about the house. So it was actually very interesting exploring the house, getting to know where a lot of the murders happened, how they happened, and a bunch of other stuff. In this movie, it's just like, okay, well, we already saw it. One thing that is a little bit different is Stephen Price basically has a man behind the curtain who is trying to make sure that, all the stuff in the house is, running properly. And that everything that he planned to be a scare is also running properly. Like the dog from Silent Hill 2. It was him all along. Nah, that would have been a really great twist for this movie. After taking a tour, some of the people start wandering off, where one of the characters who wants to aspire to be a film director or, well, something, I don't know what she really wants, wanders off on her own and then, well, gets killed. I bet that's how the audience looks at me whenever I make a bad joke. So she gets dragged off, and then of course everyone starts to worry that she's missing. So a tiny little search party goes out to look for her, and all they can find is her camera. Which of course doesn't show any of the spooky stuff, it just shows her, well, getting mauled. Kind of, I guess. Of course, Evelyn assumes that this whole thing is just a trick to scare everybody, but even Steven has no idea what's going on, and he assumes that Evelyn is doing this whole thing. Once again, would have been clever if we didn't know the house was haunted. People get separated again, and eventually, Evelyn gets killed! Or does she? Of course she didn't. This is an unoriginal remake. Everyone starts to assume that Steven is behind his wife's death, especially because of all the feuding going on between the two. Well, I wouldn't blame them necessarily. And they lock him up in a schizophrenic machine. Good old Steven definitely goes a little bit crazy, where, just like in the original, the one doctor character is the only person who shows up that was actually intentional in coming because he was having a relationship with Evelyn. However, psych, she's just a psycho and doesn't actually love anybody. Once again, going back to the original, you were always wondering, okay, who was actually the bad guy here? Of course, Vincent Price set up the whole thing, but you didn't know that his wife was maybe behind some of the things with this party just to go ahead and get him killed off, which of course she was orchestrating all along. But, of course, in the long run, Vincent Price was also orchestrating his own maniacal plan in killing her. And yes, in this movie, they still have that aspect of the husband and wife playing each other. And yes, the wife does want to kill her husband, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Just like in the original, Steven does eventually get shot by one of the guests, where Evelyn then goes over to the body and then is like, oh, well, thank God he's dead. But psych, because it's an unoriginal remake.
Is that a fact, princess?
Steven goes a little bit crazy, throws her through a wall, and... Okay, I will admit, the way that the ghost is in this movie, it's a little bit creepy. That's really the only compliment this movie's getting from me. Something about it being just this huge giant amalgamation of all the spirits who were in this house. It is a little bit unnerving and actually is kind of very similar to the whole aspect of Legion from the Bible. But it's still not good. At this point, everyone's now just trying to get out of the house. Watson Pritchard gets killed. Stephen Price winds up meeting with two of the characters who they find out apparently they were related to some of the medical staff at the hospital. Yeah, that's just a plot point that's just thrown in there, and that's why they were invited. It's dumb. They all try escaping when they do figure out that there is at least one possible way where they could exit the house. Eventually, Stephen Price, who does try to do at least one honorable thing to a certain degree, eventually gets killed. They find a way to get out where the girl makes it out. However, the guy has to stay behind and deal with his demons. However, Pritchard's a good ghost. Okay, so we got a good spirit who was able to get them out. What are the rules of this movie? Our two heroes sit on the roof of the building where, of course, they wind up getting all of the money and then give a nice good old chuckle, as if nothing horrific happened in this movie.
That was one kick-ass party.
Okay, one more thing. How do we get down from here?
It's so hilarious. A bunch of people just died. Isn't it funny? This movie is one of the biggest pieces of crap when it comes to horror remakes. It is uninspired, unimaginative, and when it comes to this movie taking concepts from the original movie, it turns it completely upside down in a completely just unimaginative way. It takes away the whole mystery of the house and why it drove people insane by just explaining, oh, it's just because it was a creepy insane asylum with evil people. And then on top of that, adding just a bunch of characters who you really just don't give a darn about. You honestly wish that they would all die because they're all jerks. In the original movie, everybody was likable. Even Vincent Price and Carol O'Mart were completely likable. Even in their incredibly jerkish, mean-spirited manner, you did like them because at least they were witty, classy, and just overall just more positive than these two characters. I assure you that basically by the ending of this viewing, this is a haunted house I never want to revisit ever again. I just don't get it. Like, how could you screw up House on Haunted Hill? I mean, there are so many bad horror remakes. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a few good ones, but like with House on Haunted Hill, like how could you screw it up? I mean, it's so simple in its execution. Like how? I just don't get it, but whatever. Hey, at least I'm done and I don't have to watch this movie ever again. And I mean, it's not like they made a sequel or anything, right? Right? Why is there a return to House on Haunted Hill? This has been the Valley of Death, where everything is spooky, but we keep things light. I'll see you guys around.